A look at the final two members of the Miami Dolphins 2024 NFL Draft Class, safety Patrick McMorris and wide receiver Tahj Washington, here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I'll admit it, I've got a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. We're putting a bow on this 2024 Miami Dolphins class, the individual spotlights of the players. We heard pre-draft about Chop Robinson and Patrick Paul. And then we've heard a little bit in the pre-draft process about names like Muhammad Kamara. And then we've this week have been given deep dives to the day three guys, Jalen Wright, Muhammad Kamara, Malik Washington. Today is Patrick McMorris and Tahj Washington wrapped up into one for an all-encompassing day three spotlight of the Dolphins 2024 NFL draft class. And I think the feedback on both of these players is really interesting. Patrick McMorris, it sounded like hearing from Mike McDaniel and Chris Greer in the immediate aftermath of the draft. This was a player that the scouts really pounded the table for the Dolphins to come back and draft later. And he's not your stereotypical draft profile as far as athletes. I think that's probably the first place that you start. Interesting intersection of some really likable football instincts with, I think, an athletic profile and some limitations that we're going to have to wrap our heads around. So let's kind of get into who Patrick McMorris is. There's a little bit more of just informational, introductory for this platform and for this audience that you guys haven't gotten this with Patrick McMorris like you have some of the other guys. So we'll start here. He's a big safety. He's 6 foot, 207 pounds, 77-inch wingspan. That's 66th percentile for safeties to come through the combine since 2000. 31 7/8 inch arms. That's 58th percentile of safeties to come through the combine since 2000. He played 4 years at San Diego State and was a starter the last 2 years there before transferring to Cal with his 5th year of eligibility. His best and most productive season was in 2021 as a member of the San Diego State Aztecs, in which he posted 4 interceptions and 9 passes defense with 90 tackles that season. He tied that career high in tackles this past season with 90 at Cal in 13 games, but didn't quite have the same ball production. He had 1 interception versus 4 in 2021, but 2 forced fumbles as well to his name. So big safeties, you kind of perk up a little bit. You say, okay, Pac-12 or what used to be the Pac-12, now the Pac-2, but Cal's not in it. But played on a bigger stage than what San Diego State had previously. Played a Pac-12 schedule this past season. And then you get to the athletic testing. 31-inch vert and a 9 foot 4 inch. I'm doing that math. It's 112 inches, but I figured it out. It's 9 feet 4 inches. Not a math guy. That's 5th and 6th percentile for safeties. And that's kind of where the exchange of big safety with underwhelming explosiveness numbers, I think that is something that kind of creates the conflict. And that's how a player like this, I think, falls a little bit in the draft. When I watch him on film, the football instincts are there. You see a lot of recognition. You see quick recognition. You see anticipation. Be that in shallow zone coverage, underneath zone coverage. He's played multiple spots. He's played like 100 plus snaps in the slot on the second level as a linebacker and as a deep safety in like each of the last 3 seasons. He's moved around a ton. I like that versatility in a player, right? But if you're that underwhelming of an athlete, and I do think the limited athleticism shows up from time to time, I think that probably makes you more of a just have baseline athleticism, pursue a special teams role. And we'll talk a little bit about that along with Tahj Washington and the pathways to the 53 for both of these guys. But I like the way he fits the run. He comes downhill with an attitude. He takes on blockers with an attitude. He's got fairly good length for a defensive back to be able to stack up blocks at the line of scrimmage, get downhill. The range, the deep range, is a question, but I think his wingspan is such that in intermediate areas, if you're trying to layer a crosser, USC had one of these. Ironically enough, I believe it was thrown to Tahj Washington, where Caleb Williams has pressure in his face and kind of does the fadeaway crossing route, trying to layer it in up over top. And McMorris sticks his foot in the ground and he drives and gets depth and gets his hand up and breaks up the pass for a nice PBU. You see the processing and the understanding and a willingness to kind of like get in and do the dirty work. I thought the USC game, just to kind of go back to that game, had a couple great incidences in the red zone. You're in red zone defense. Everything's a little bit more congested. And just in that tighter space, the aggressiveness that he played with, I could see why scouts love him, right? And coaches maybe can be a little bit more keen towards gravitating towards the tools because they want the tools to work with to mold the player. The scouts see the football instincts, the toughness, the grittiness, the aggressiveness, and they're like, dude, this is a football guy through and through. And I would agree with that assessment of Patrick McMorris completely. The question is, what's the ceiling with an athletic profile that is below the standard of your typical defensive snap taker as a defensive back at the NFL level? And that's where there's one big area for Pat that I think he's going to probably be focused on a lot in training camp in the preseason this summer to see if he can get a bid onto the 53. We'll talk a little bit more about that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. But next, we're going to shift our gear to Tahj Washington, the wide receiver from USC, who we just mentioned as well. Talk a little bit about his game, where he stands out to me, and then we'll get into both of these players and their potential pathways to the 53-man roster. That's next here, Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Right now, we get to take the time out and game off. We're talk a little bit more about Monopoly Go. I can hear what you're saying. Flag on the play, dude. You already talked about Monopoly Go today, but there's so much stuff with this game. You guys got to know what you're missing if you're not playing Monopoly Go. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for timed tournaments where you can work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get, like unique stickers that you could trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends as you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. There are a ton of unique mini games to play, timed events that can help you win big, massive multipliers for everything you win, or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover on Monopoly Go. So get off the bench. Go download it now, free on the Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Tahj Washington, the final pick. Patrick McMorris picked at 198 overall in the 6th round. The Dolphins drafting Tahj Washington, another wide receiver, with pick 241. I did retroactively go back and grade both of these players. And ironically enough, Patrick McMorris graded as a 6th round value for me, and Tahj Washington rated as a 7th round value. So that Miami's class ends up with 5 players that were in my top 100 players in the class, the first 5 picks. And then I think the final 2 picks, I don't know if Chris Greer told the Dolphins media that they had about 140 players on their draft board at the start of the process. So presumably these guys were on that to get the call here. Sometimes teams will punt and trade out altogether if they're out of players on their board. And just kind of collect like future 7th round picks or something like that. That obviously not being the case for Miami using these picks. So Tahj Washington's going to get the same introductory courtesy for our audience here. You've probably done or you may not have done some of your research here before listening to Locked On Dolphins. And if you have, stick with me for about a minute. And if you haven't, Let's get to know Tahj Washington. This is a former Memphis Tiger. He played 2 seasons at Memphis, was very productive in his second season, his redshirt freshman season with the Tigers program. Had 43 receptions for 743 yards, averaged over 17 yards per catch, 6 receiving touchdowns, also had a rushing touchdown for a total of 7 touchdowns in that season with Memphis before transferring in 2021 to USC. He then posted 602, 785, and 1,062 yards in the 3 seasons with SC. His yards per catch went up 11.1, 15.7, 18.0. His touchdowns went up 1, 6, 8. So a player that got better every season that he was at USC. The challenge with the Tahj Washington evaluation, he's a really likable player. You could tell there's some good instincts. He's also got some toughness, but there is just kind of a lack of requisite size that you would typically associate with an NFL player, particularly one who's going to have to live in the slot. So you have a player who I don't think deals with contact particularly well, but also a player who living in the middle of the field might not be the best utilization of his skills either. So that's kind of the intersection with him, in the same way that I think Patrick McMorris had an athleticism question. I think Tahj Washington has a size/functional strength question that he's going to have to sort his way out. But with that said, let's get into exactly where the size issue lies. 5'9" 3/4 for his height. That's 9th percentile. 9th percentile. So it's bottom 10% of NFL wide receivers in the last 25 years. 174 pounds. That is 4th percentile. That's bottom 5% of all wide receivers since in the last 25 years. A wingspan of 70 inches, which is 3rd percentile amongst all wide receivers in the last 25 years to come through the NFL Combine. 29 1/8 inch arms. That is 2nd percentile for wide receivers to come through the NFL Combine in the last 25 years. And then his hand size is 8 3/8. 3rd percentile for hand size. So bottom 10 percentile for every size measure that you can collect. But he had a 10 feet 2 inch standing broad jump, which is 55th percentile. I think from a size adjusted standpoint, it's not enough to bring you back. A case in point, I know relative his RAS score, relative athleticism score, is a little concerning, because while he ran sufficient speed time, ran 4.5, he had a below average 10-yard split at that size and stature of player. But when you get into who Tahj Washington is, extended plays down the field, good ball tracking skills, can get up the seam, show some toughness, hit a deep post behind Patrick McMorris in the Cal game. McMorris drove on, it was a 3-by-1, and Washington was the 2 to the passing strength. The 1 ran an in-breaking route that McMorris drove on and cut, and the deep post hit behind it. It looked like McMorris was expecting the nickel defender to turn and flip and carry it, or the front or the backside safety to get depth and help carry against the post, because there was no threat to that side of the field. So I'm not blaming that play specifically on Patrick McMorris, but just observing that there was, it was really fun watching that game, knowing that there's a Miami Dolphins player on both sides of the field, and watching some of the instances in which they butted heads and went against each other. So really good hands. This was another player like Malik Washington. I think you were surprised to find out that he had 1 drop on 74 targets this year. That's 1.7% drop rate. He was another player who was not afraid to go up and get the football in spite of being a smaller player. I think that's the trend with the 2 wide receivers the Dolphins got. They got sure-handed guys that outplayed their size at the catch point. I think Tahj is a little bit more of he's less physical. He's not as big. I think that creates some extra barriers for him, being kind of like the inside-outside type player that Malik Washington is. But this is a player that caught 13 passes deep downfield and was top 10 in amongst qualifying receivers with 50-plus targets, according to Pro Football Focus, in deep yards down the field on 20-plus yard targets. He had over almost 600 of his yards came on those plays. They did scheme him some screens, 19 screen receptions this season for 162 yards. Not superbly productive, but they did manufacture some touches to get him the ball in his hands fairly quickly. He did showcase some initial short area slipperiness, but playing through physicality was not something that necessarily popped a ton. Of the 59 receptions he had, 50 of them came out of the slot this year. And of his 1,062 receiving yards, 984 of them came out of the slot. So the vast majority of his production came in the slot. And I just question, as a player with stature questions, are you going to be somebody that has to, that can make the same impact at the next level? And I think that's probably why you see a player like this who is available a little bit later in the draft, or a lot of it later in the draft, in the 7th round, just because there's kind of an identity crisis that I think can exist there that Tahj is going to have to work his way through and find his way onto the 53, probably with some other contributions. And that is where we're going to finish this episode of Locked On Dolphins. We're going to look at both Patrick McMorris and Tahj Washington and get into where they can make the 53 as late round picks. That's next to bring this episode of Locked On Dolphins to a close. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to win big and bring home a dub of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The name of the game for both of these guys is special teams. Special teams, special players, special teams, special plays. What's up, brother? I'm aging myself. I'm not as up to speed on the lingo and the pop culture stuff that is on social media as I once was. But thanks to the Dolphins social media team, I did get that one for OTAs when they were coming in and doing "What's up, brother" to the introductory or to the camera at the front door. So if you knew what that is, please excuse my mid-30s ignorance. And if you don't know what it is, just pretend the last 30 seconds didn't happen. And we'll get into special teams for both of these players. Patrick McMorris, I think you look at his aggressiveness to fit the run. You look at the length that he has. And I think he does have baseline level coverage athleticism on kicks, whether that's punts or whether that is kickoffs, especially with the new kickoff rules, where it's a little bit more like a run fit, right? You're not running all the way down the field. You're lined up on the plus side of the 50, 10 yards away from the receiving team. The challenge for Pat and the area that he's really going to have to clean up is the tackling. Patrick McMorris had a career missed tackle rate of approximately 20%. And a lot of it was not, oh, he couldn't get there. A lot of it was he's flying around, running hard, and maybe he doesn't have the same natural like gas and accelerator as some other players do. And that's why he's a little bit slower to gear down and kind of come to balance before the challenging the ball carrier. But he will need to, I think there's enough with the hands and the length and the attitude and the toughness and the size to get into blockers and deconstruct blocks, particularly on kick coverage. But do you have the open field consistent tackling? I mean, it was a major contributing factor to Miami losing the division week 18 last year. And there was an injury that was obviously involved in that play. And ironically enough, if you asked me to kind of think of my vision for Patrick McMorris as a player, like what is his roster ability forecast look like? I could see it being a little bit like a Cameron Good, who's also a Cal Golden Bear. Very different positions, but Cameron Good was a 7th round draft pick, went on the practice squad, kind of floats around, get some call-up opportunities for some spot special teams roles, and see if you can parlay it long-term. I could see that being the outcome for Patrick McMorris. I probably would not peg him as a favored player, considering the presence of Saron Neal and Elijah Campbell as guys that I think are ahead of him from a tackling element. Saron Neal was brought in here to be a special team stud for this football team. And then you obviously have Jordan Poyer and Javon Holland. So I do think he has an uphill climb to make the roster, but never say never with a rookie contract if he can come in and really find some inspiration on special teams. Tahj Washington, on the other hand, I think there's really only one pathway to Tahj Washington being an impact player for this team in year one as a 2024 rookie player, and that is also on special teams. Special teams, he has 22 career kick returns and averaged 19.9 yards per return across his 2020 season in Memphis and his first 2 seasons in USC. He did not return any kicks in 2023. So that's a player that I think the Dolphins are going to have a lot of competition for the kick return stuff. Tahj Washington, you've done it for 3 years with limited opportunities. The most returns you've had in a season was 12. Get in there and mix it up, right? I think the competition of the wide receiver room for offensive reps is very daunting for a player of Taj's skill set, who I think shines on crossing routes across the middle and extended plays as a deep play player, but doesn't run the fastest of times. And I don't know how well he will play in the middle of the field as an NFL receiver. I think there's kind of an identity crisis there. So for me, if I'm looking for Tahj Washington, and that's not dismiss his opportunity to come in, blow the doors off, blow everybody away, learn this offense inside and out, and earn opportunities that maybe I'm not processing here on May 1st, right? Because it's not won based on your college tape. Your reps are earned based on when you do when you get to camp. So I don't want to be dismissive of any of these guys. But as I look at what they are now, my prognosis of them and kind of me setting my own expectations for these players, that's kind of where I fall on both these guys. That's going to do it for the class. I do want to, tomorrow, we will spend a little bit of time talking about the grade of the draft class. And then next week, we will get into the undrafted free agents, sleepers, I think, who could make the 53-man roster, names to watch, names I really liked. I think I have some intrigue. And then we'll remind you guys of some players who were a part of the developmental crop from last year, who are some guys that could take a step. Could a Zeke Vandenberg, who I know somebody in the comments acknowledged yesterday, could somebody like that maybe move the needle for Miami too? We'll get into those guys next week. But we're going to finish the draft class on Friday by looking at how I would grade the draft class, knowing full well that your accurate grade for the draft class comes after a few seasons, after they got a little bit of NFL playing time under their belt. But we'll come at it through a few different angles. We'll do that tomorrow. So you can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys checking on the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I will be back again tomorrow. Fins up.